I used to think the safest money in the world was church money. Not because it was guarded by locks or cameras, but because it lived behind a kind of invisible fence, faith, trust, goodwill, and that warm communal certainty that we would never do that to each other. Turns out an invisible fence only works if everyone agrees it's real. The first time I noticed something was off, I didn't even call it off. I called it messy. I called it human. I called it we're all tired. I called it the deposit probably hit late. I called it everything except what it was, because naming a thing changes it. Naming it makes it harder to ignore. And ignoring it was easier at first. My name is Paul, and I was the guy who handled the finances for a small community group connected to our church. Small enough that we didn't have a staff accountant, small enough that we did bake sales and spaghetti dinners, small enough that the people who donated were the same people who hugged you in the hallway and asked about your mom's health and brought casseroles when someone's water heater died. We were in a mega church with a glossy annual report. We were folding chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, a dusty storage closet full of paper plates, and a stubborn belief that kindness adds up. We called the group the Bridge. The idea was simple. We provided small, immediate help for people who fell through cracks. Utility shutoffs, hotel nights for someone leaving a bad situation, gas cards, groceries, school supplies, small rent gaps. Nothing flashy, just enough to keep people from sliding. And everyone loved our leader. His name was Darren. Even writing that makes my stomach tighten, because for a long time I loved him too. Darren was charismatic in the way that made you feel seen. He remembered names. He asked questions and actually waited for answers. He laughed easily. He cried easily too, at the right moments, the moments that made you think this man has a heart. This man cares. This man is safe. He was the kind of person who could stand in front of a room and make you feel like you were part of something bigger, even if the room was a half-lit fellowship hall with a buzzing fluorescent bulb and a stack of hymnals leaning crooked in the corner. When Darren spoke about the Bridge, people listened. When he asked for volunteers, hands went up. When he asked for donations, people gave. And when Darren asked me to take over the finances, I said yes. Not because I was dying to balance checkbooks for free, but because I'm the kind of person who worries about details other people don't see, and Darren knew that. He told me, Paul, you're steady. We need steady. And something in me responded to that like a dog hearing its name. I was also, if I'm honest, flattered. I had a regular job in the real world. Nothing glamorous, just a mid-level administrative role where I lived in spreadsheets and schedules. I wasn't important in the big sense of the word, but I was dependable. In a place like church, dependable becomes its own kind of importance. So I took the little metal cash box with the key that stuck sometimes, and I took the shoebox of receipts and the spiral notebook with handwritten totals, and I took the binder with old bank statements, and I started doing what I always do when a system feels too soft around the edges. I try to make it solid. At first, it felt almost peaceful. I'd sit at my kitchen table after dinner, the house quiet except for the low hum of the fridge, and I'd organize. I'd line up receipts. I'd enter deposits. I'd reconcile numbers. I'd make simple reports Darren could share at meetings. Funds received, funds used, how many people helped, how much left. It didn't feel like work. It felt like stewardship. And for months, everything looked fine. We brought in money from small donations. 5s and 10s folded into envelopes. Checks made out to the church with Bridge in the memo line. The occasional anonymous 100 that made Darren's eyes shine when he told the story of God providing. We also had a couple of larger donors. Families in the congregation who gave quietly, consistent amounts, almost like a subscription to compassion. We gave out help in careful ways. We paid bills directly when we could, wrote checks to landlords or utility companies, bought grocery cards when time was urgent. Darren was big on urgency, big on the moment someone asks is the moment they need it, and I understood that. Need doesn't wait. We had one main checking account. Darren and I were the authorized signers. That was the old system. The older treasurer before me had it that way. And no one questioned it because questioning implies suspicion, and suspicion is an ugly word in a church hallway. At the beginning, I didn't question it either. Then came the first gap. It was small, almost insultingly small. $20, maybe $30. Something like that. The kind of discrepancy you can produce just by sneezing wrong on a calculator. I noticed it because I'm not casual with numbers. Numbers are either right or they're not. And when they're not, there's a reason. The deposit slip from Sunday's fundraiser said 1 total. The bank statement showed a slightly different deposit. It wasn't even dramatic. Maybe the bank processed it under a different date. Maybe someone miscounted cash. Maybe a check bounced. I flagged it in my spreadsheet with a yellow highlight and wrote myself a note. Check next statement. Confirm. The next statement came. The discrepancy stayed. I pulled everything back out and sat there with the receipts and the slip and the statement, and I felt a small, uneasy pinch behind my ribs. It wasn't fear yet. It was reluctance. Like my brain was trying to close a door on a room I didn't want to enter. I told myself, somebody just miscounted. It happens. We're volunteers. I brought it up to Darren after our meeting one Thursday night. Everyone was folding chairs, laughing, talking about weekend plans. Darren was chatting with a woman who'd brought cookies. I waited until he was free. Then I said, casually, hey, the deposit from Sunday looks like it's short by a little. Nothing major. I'm just trying to reconcile. Darren's face didn't change much. He was good at that. Good at smooth facial transitions. But his eyes sharpened for a fraction of a second, like a camera focusing. Then he smiled, soft and reassuring, and said, oh, that's probably just because we covered that emergency hotel night right after the fundraiser. I grabbed some cash because the person needed it immediately. I meant to tell you. He said like it was no big deal. Like the fact that he'd grabbed some cash out of the deposit pile was as normal as grabbing a napkin. My mouth went dry. Okay, I said, because that's what you say when you don't want to look like the guy who doubts a compassionate act. Darren kept smiling. You know how it is. People come in desperate. We can't make them wait for checks to clear. Sometimes it has to be right now. He put a hand on my shoulder, a warm, friendly pressure. Thanks for keeping an eye on it. We need you. And just like that, the pinch behind my ribs eased because he'd given me a story that fit our values. Urgency, mercy, action. The story mattered more than the $20. But later that night, in bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought, why wouldn't he just tell me before? Why wouldn't he document it? Why wouldn't he write down the name, the amount, the reason? Then I thought, because he's busy, because he's helping people, because I'm being picky, I rolled onto my side and tried to sleep. The next gap came a month later. Bigger this time. Still not massive, maybe 100. Enough to matter, not enough to call the police. Enough to make you pause, not enough to make you scream. Same pattern. The fundraiser cash and checks didn't match what ended up in the account. And in the ledger Darren kept, his own handwritten notes, it was vague. Emergency assistance. Gas. Food. No receipts. No names. No exact numbers. I approached it even more gently this time, because I'd learned how to be gentle around Darren's emotional gravity. He could make you feel like you were stepping on kittens if you came at him wrong. Hey, I said after service one Sunday, while people milled around, I'm seeing some cash withdrawals that don't have notes. Do you remember what those were for? I just want to keep clean records. Darren's expression shifted into something wounded, almost imperceptible but effective. His voice dropped. Paul, I'm trying to protect people. Some of the folks we help don't want their names in a ledger. You know, they're ashamed. They're scared. If they knew we were writing everything down like a business, they might not come. He looked at me like I should already understand this. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I get that, I said quickly. I'm not asking for names necessarily. Just amounts and categories. Something, in case the church board ever asks. Darren exhaled, slow and sorrowful, like I was exhausting him. They won't, he said. They trust us. They trust me. That's why we can do this work. Then, softer, do you trust me? There it was. The trap hidden inside the question. If I said no, I was not just distrusting Darren. I was distrusting the whole mission. I was distrusting the faith structure that held it. So I said what people say when a charismatic leader asks them that question. Of course I do. Darren smiled again, relief and gratitude all over his face. Good. Then don't let the enemy get a foothold with suspicion. We're doing holy work. I nodded because I was standing in a church hallway, and holy work is a hard phrase to argue with. But that night, the pinch came back sharper because the gaps were starting to have a rhythm. And I realized that the rhythm was Darren. It wasn't the fundraiser. It wasn't the volunteers counting cash. It wasn't the bank. It was always Darren, and it was always emotion. He always had a story. A person crying in his office. A mother with kids in the car. A man sleeping in a broken-down van. Darren's eyes wet when he told it, his voice trembling, his hands open like he was pleading with me to see the human need. And I did see it. That was the problem. I saw it so clearly that I stopped looking at the numbers. Until the gap turned into something I couldn't ignore. It happened in late fall, when the air had that sharp, dry smell and the church parking lot was scattered with brittle leaves. We just had our biggest fundraiser of the year, a community chili cook-off. People paid a small entry fee. We sold desserts. We had raffle baskets. It was the kind of wholesome event that makes you believe in your town again. We counted the money in the back room afterward. There were 4 of us at the table. Me, Darren, an older woman named Marcia, and a guy named Tim who always showed up early and stayed late. We counted cash twice. We wrote down totals. We put everything in the deposit bag. Darren locked the bag in his office until Monday morning, when he said he'd take it to the bank. That was the system. It was also the weakness, because Monday's deposit hit the account, and the number was wrong. Not wrong by a little, wrong by a lot. Over $1,000. I stared at the statement on my screen, my eyes going back and forth like if I looked hard enough, it would change. My throat tightened. My palms went damp. I pulled up my spreadsheet. I pulled out the handwritten total from the night of the cook-off. I double-checked the math. I checked the raffle count. I checked the entry list. I checked everything. The missing amount stayed missing. And for the first time, the story Darren had for me wasn't going to be enough because the missing amount wasn't a quick emergency cash grab. It was a chunk, a real chunk. If you grabbed that much from a fundraiser deposit, you didn't do it casually. You did it intentionally. I sat there at my kitchen table, the same table that used to feel peaceful, and I felt something shift in me. Not anger yet, not revenge, something colder, clarity. I called Darren. He didn't pick up. I left a message. Hey, I'm reconciling the chili cook-off deposit, and I'm seeing a big discrepancy. Call me when you can. He called back 3 hours later, cheerful like nothing was wrong. Paul, sorry, I was in meetings. What's up? I swallowed. The chili cook-off deposit is short. By about $1,400. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. Then Darren's voice softened. Oh, another pause. Then, yeah. Okay, I need to tell you something. And please hear my heart. I closed my eyes. He told me a story. Of course he did. A young couple, new to town, had come to him Sunday night. Their baby was sick. They didn't have insurance. They'd been turned away somewhere. Darren said they were desperate and crying, and he couldn't bear it. So I took some of the cash, he said, voice heavy with emotion. I gave them what they needed. It was either that or watch their baby suffer. He inhaled like he was holding back tears. I was going to replace it. I thought I could get it from a donor this week. I didn't want to bother everyone. I gripped the phone. Did you get a receipt? I asked, and my voice sounded strange to me, flat, tight. Darren sounded almost offended. Paul, come on. They were in crisis. I wasn't going to hand them a clipboard and ask them to sign. Did you pay directly to a clinic? I asked. No, he said. They needed cash. Do you know their last name? Their address? Anything. I told you, Darren said, and I could hear the edge now, the irritation under the compassion. They were ashamed. They didn't want to be tracked. They just needed help. I felt my stomach twist. Darren, we can't just take money out of deposits without documentation. He sighed, like I was being childish. We can if it saves a child. And then he did what he always did. He pushed the emotional lever. You're focusing on the ledger instead of the Lord. Silence stretched between us. I could hear a faint sound on his end, traffic, maybe, or a radio. Finally, he said, softer again, Paul, I'm sorry. I should have told you. I didn't want you to worry. I almost laughed at that, because the thing he didn't want me to do was look. Worry is passive. Looking is active. I said, we need to fix the process. Starting now. Darren hesitated. What do you mean? Dual signatures, I said. No more cash withdrawals without 2 people. No more deposits handled by 1 person. No more vague notes. I'll set up a system. The air changed. I could feel Darren's mood drop through the phone. Paul, he said slowly. Are you accusing me of something? There was again. The trap. I chose my words carefully. I'm saying the system needs accountability. For everyone. Including me. Darren's voice cooled. Accountability is fine. Distrust is not. I'm not trying to distrust you, I said, and I hated myself for how quickly I softened. I'm trying to protect the group. A pause. Then Darren said, okay, do what you need to do. But his tone told me, do what you need to do and watch what happens next. After I hung up, I sat still for a long time, listening to my own breathing. I realized something then, something I should have realized earlier. When a person reacts to accountability like it's an accusation, it's because accountability threatens them. That night, I opened my laptop and started building traps. I didn't call them traps in my head, not at first. I called them safeguards, procedures, best practices. But deep down, I knew what I was doing. I was building a quiet net. The first thing I did was create a proper ledger system. Not just my spreadsheet, but a shared record with categories, dates, and documentation requirements. I wrote out a simple policy. Any assistance over $50 must have a receipt or a direct payment whenever possible. Any cash assistance must be signed off by 2 leaders and documented with at least a basic intake form. No humiliating questions, just enough to show it was real. The second thing I did was change the bank settings. I called the bank and asked about alerts. They could send notifications for withdrawals over a certain amount. They could notify me for any check written. They could show images of cleared checks online. They could lock down who could request cashier's checks. They could add a second approval layer for transfers. It took paperwork and time, and I had to explain it in ways that sounded neutral. The bank rep didn't care about Darren's charisma. The bank rep cared about fraud prevention. That was a small relief. I also requested that we stop using cash whenever possible. Checks, cards, electronic payments, anything that created a trail. Cash is the language of plausible deniability. The third thing I did was push for dual signatures. Darren didn't like it, but he couldn't openly oppose it without looking suspicious. So he played along, smiling at meetings and saying, Paul is just being thorough. But I watched him. I watched how his smile tightened when I spoke. I watched how he kept checking his phone when I explained the policy. I watched how he started telling stories that painted administrative burden as a threat to compassion. He'd say things like, we have to be careful we don't turn ministry into paperwork. People nodded. He'd say, some people are already afraid to ask for help. We can't make it harder. People murmured agreement. And I'd sit there, calm, and say, we can be compassionate and accountable. They're not enemies. But the room would feel divided, like there were 2 teams forming without anyone admitting it. Darren's team, faith, heart, urgency. My team, systems, records, caution. I didn't want to be on a team against Darren. I wanted Darren to stop taking money. But wanting doesn't change reality. The first week after the changes, nothing happened. Then Darren tested the net. It was subtle. He asked me for the checkbook outside of a meeting. Hey, he said, friendly, I need to write a quick check for a family. Emergency. Can you bring it by my office? Sure, I said. We'll do it together, and we'll log it. His smile flickered. It's fine. I can handle it. I know you can, I said. But we agreed on 2 signatures. Darren's eyes hardened for a fraction of a second, then softened into disappointment. Paul, he said quietly, this is why people don't trust institutions. Because we make help conditional. I held my ground. It's not conditional. It's documented. He leaned closer, lowering his voice as if sharing something sacred. Do you want to be right? Or do you want to be righteous? The fact that he could weaponize that word, righteous, made my stomach lurch. I took a slow breath. We can do both. I'll come now. In his office, we wrote the check together. Darren filled in the payee, an apartment complex. Good. That meant it was direct. We both signed. I logged it. I asked for the request form. Darren's jaw clenched slightly. I'll get it to you. He never did. When I asked later, he said, I forgot. It's been chaos. Chaos. That was Darren's favorite blanket. Throw chaos over anything and people stop asking for edges. I started keeping my own notes. Not emotional notes. Not Darren seemed off notes. Hard notes. Dates. Times. Amounts. Missing forms. Conversations. Exact frases. I hated that I was doing it. I hated that I felt like some kind of investigator in a place where I used to feel peace. But I kept going because the alternative was pretending. And pretending was what let the gaps grow. A month later, the bank alert came. It was late afternoon on a Tuesday. I was at work, halfway through a routine task, when my phone buzzed. Withdrawal alert. $500. My stomach dropped. I opened the bank app immediately, fingers cold. It was a cash withdrawal at a branch near the church. The note field was empty. I stared at it, and I felt something in me go still. Like the last part of my doubt snapped into certainty. Because with dual signatures in place, Darren shouldn't have been able to do that. Unless he still had a way. I called the bank. After navigating the menu and waiting on hold, I got a human. I explained that this was a church account with 2 authorized signers, and I was seeing a cash withdrawal. I asked how it was possible. The rep said, cash withdrawals can be done by an authorized signer with ID. I felt my jaw tighten, even if we have dual signatures. Dual signatures apply to checks, she said, not in-person cash withdrawals. I closed my eyes. I had built a net and left a hole. I thanked her, hung up, and immediately called Darren. He picked up on the second ring, voice bright. Hey, Paul, what was the 500 cash withdrawal? I asked. Silence. Then Darren said, slowly, oh, that. Yeah, I said, and my voice sounded calm in a way that surprised me. That. Darren exhaled. Emergency. A woman needed to get away tonight. She couldn't wait. I did what I had to do. You didn't tell me, I said. I didn't have time, Darren replied, and now there was annoyance. Paul, do you want me to call you every time someone is in danger? I said, I want the process followed. The process, Darren repeated, like the word tasted bad. Yes, I said. The process that keeps us from losing donor trust. The process that keeps us from accusations. The process that protects the ministry. Darren's voice sharpened. You're acting like I stole it. I didn't answer immediately. Because here was the truth. I was acting like he stole it because I believed he did. But saying that out loud felt like dropping a match in a room full of gasoline. So I said, carefully, I'm acting like we need documentation. Darren's tone turned wounded again, like he could flip it on command. Paul, I thought you were different. I thought you understood what we do. I do understand, I said, my throat tightened. That's why I'm trying to protect it. Darren said, softly, you're hurting the work more than you know. Then he hung up. I sat there at my desk at work, staring at nothing, and I felt the blowback begin. It didn't come all at once. It came like weather changes, small shifts you don't notice until you're suddenly cold. People started being a little quieter when I walked into the fellowship hall. Marcia stopped making eye contact as much. Tim still said hi, but he didn't linger. At meetings, Darren began to frame things in ways that made me look like an obstacle without naming me. He'd say, some people want to slow us down with policies. He'd say, we have to ask ourselves if we're serving people or serving paper. He'd look around the room and sigh, like he was carrying the emotional weight of the whole community. And people, want to feel like they were on the side of compassion, would nod. I started to feel like a villain in a story I hadn't chosen. But the numbers kept telling their own story. The withdrawals continued. Not always cash. Sometimes checks written to vague payees, cash in the memo line. Sometimes small transfers that looked like reimbursements. Sometimes duplicate charges from a debit card Darren insisted we keep for emergencies. And every time, Darren had emotion. I began to realize something that made my skin prickle. Darren wasn't just taking money. He was training the community. He was training them to accept gaps as proof of generosity. He was training them to see questions as attacks. He was training them to confuse accountability with betrayal. I started meeting with a friend outside the church, someone who worked in accounting at a nonprofit. I didn't tell her names. I just described the patterns, the lack of documentation, the cash withdrawals, the emotional deflection. She listened, face serious, and said, Paul, that's classic. Classic what? I asked, even though I already knew. Classic misuse of funds, she said. He's using the mission to cover the trail. and you're the only person looking at the trail. My chest tightened. What do I do? She said, you document everything. You don't confront alone. You bring it to a board, an oversight committee. You make it about protecting the organization, and you prepare for backlash. Backlash. I repeated and my voice went thin. She nodded. Because people don't want to believe their hero is a thief. They'll call you jealous, bitter, legalistic, faithless. They'll attack your motives because it's easier than facing the truth. I went home that night and sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, and I felt the weight of what I was stepping into. I didn't want to be the person who exposed Darren. I wanted to be wrong. But every time I checked the account, the truth was there, quiet and undeniable. So I kept building. I requested a formal audit. Not from a big firm. We couldn't afford that. But a volunteer audit committee within the church's finance team. I framed it as a routine annual review. I wrote an email with careful wording. Transparency, stewardship, donor confidence. Darren responded quickly, too quickly. He said, an audit would communicate distrust. We should be careful. I replied, an audit communicates responsibility. He didn't answer after that, but he did something else. He started telling people, quietly, that I was struggling spiritually, not in a direct accusation way, in a concerned, pastoral way. He'd say, pray for Paul. He's carrying a lot of anxiety. He'd say, sometimes the enemy attacks those closest to the work. He'd say, Paul is very numbers focused right now, and I'm worried about his peace. And people, wanting to be supportive, started treating me like I was fragile. They'd ask, are you okay? They'd pat my arm. They'd say, don't worry so much. God provides. Their kindness felt like a cage. Because if I pushed back, I looked defensive. If I stayed quiet, I looked unstable. Darren had painted me into a corner with compassion. That's when I knew this wasn't just financial. It was psychological. I didn't sleep well for weeks. I'd lie in bed listening to the house settle, hearing the soft creak of wood as it cooled, and my mind would loop the same questions. What if I'm wrong? What if Darren really is helping people, and I'm the jerk who cares more about receipts than safety? What if I bring this up and it destroys the group? What if donors stop giving and people suffer because I couldn't let it go? Then another thought would cut through. What if Darren is lying and people suffer because we let him keep doing it? That thought had teeth. Because every dollar Darren took was a dollar that didn't go to the single mom we helped with groceries. It didn't go to the elderly man whose heat was about to be shut off. It didn't go to the teenager whose school shoes had holes. It went somewhere else. And I couldn't accept that. I decided to set a final trap. I created a small, controlled pool of funds, money designated specifically for emergency assistance, and I proposed that we keep it separate. It would be a limited amount, maybe a few hundred, and it would be replenished with documented donations. We would track it carefully, and if someone needed immediate cash, it would come from that pool with dual approval. Darren couldn't argue with it without looking like he wanted unlimited access. So he agreed, reluctantly. We set up. I deposited the emergency pool money in a locked petty cash envelope stored in the church safe. 2 keys, one with me, one with Marcia. I told Darren the process. If an emergency came up, he could call me or Marcia. We'd meet, we'd release the cash, and we'd record it. He nodded, smiling tight. Great, he said. This will help your peace. He said like a jab dressed as kindness. Then I waited. The first week, nothing. The second week, nothing. The third week, Darren asked for the emergency cash. He called me late in the evening, voice urgent. Paul, I need the emergency funds. Tonight, a family is stranded. I felt my pulse spike, but I kept my voice steady. Okay, where are you? At the church, Darren said. Can you come now? I can, I said. Marcia needs to be there too. There was a pause. Paul, it's late. She's probably asleep. She has the other key, I said. Darren exhaled sharply. Fine, call her. I did. Marcia answered, sleepy but willing. She said she'd come. When I arrived at the church, the parking lot was mostly empty. The building looked dark and still, except for a faint light under Darren's office door. Inside, the air smelled like old carpet and faint coffee. Darren met me in the hallway, his face tense. Thank you, he said quickly. They're waiting. I need to get them a hotel. Okay, I said. Let's do it right. We went to the safe. Marcia arrived a few minutes later, hair pulled back, coat thrown on over pajamas. She looked at us both like she didn't know what she was walking into. I opened the safe with my key. Marcia used hers. We removed the envelope. I asked Darren how much. He didn't hesitate. 300. I pulled out the cash, counted it slowly, and handed it to him. Who is it for? I asked gently. Darren's eyes flashed irritation. Paul. I'm not asking for their life story, I said. Just a name or initials. Something. He looked at Marcia, then back at me. They're not comfortable, he said. Marcia shifted, uneasy. I kept my tone calm. Then we could do anonymous family and a date and amount. But we need a reason. Darren's jaw worked. Finally, he said, stranded travelers. Gas and hotel. I wrote it down. I watched Darren take the cash and slip it into his pocket. Then he turned away, moving toward his office. Wait, I said. He stopped. Where are they? I asked. If they're waiting, we can pay the hotel directly. I can call it, put on the card, whatever. Darren's shoulders stiffened. They're in the car, he said. In the parking lot. I asked. Yes, Darren snapped, and then softened quickly. I'm stressed. Okay, I said. Let's go out and help them. I'll bring a gift card too, if they need food. Darren turned fully toward me, his face blank for a moment. No, he said. They don't want to come in. They're embarrassed. We can go to them, I said. Darren's eyes narrowed. Marcia looked between us, confused. Paul, Darren said, voice low, why are you doing this? Because we can help them better if we know what's actually needed, I said. Darren stared at me. Then he said, fine, stay here. I'll handle it. He walked to his office and closed the door. I stood there in the hallway with Marcia, the old fluorescent light buzzing above us. Marcia whispered, Paul, what's going on? I swallowed. I'm trying to keep the funds accountable. Marcia frowned. Do you think, Darren? I don't know, I lied. Because I did know. I just didn't want to force Marcia to say it out loud. We waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Darren didn't come back out. I walked quietly to the window near the entrance and looked out into the parking lot. It was empty. No car. No stranded travelers. No desperate family. Just Darren's vehicle and mine and Marcia's. My heart thudded hard in my chest. I turned to Marcia. She followed my gaze and went still. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Marcia whispered, Paul, there's no one out there. I nodded, the world narrowing. We stood there, two tired volunteers in a church hallway, staring at the emptiness Darren had described like it was fact. In that silence, something broke, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet snap. Marcia's face looked pale under the fluorescent light. I said softly, he just took $300. Marcia's eyes filled with tears. Why would he? I didn't answer, because I didn't know why in the emotional sense. I knew the mechanical why. Because he could, because no one stopped him, because he'd built a world where stopping him looked like attacking faith. We waited another few minutes. Finally, Darren came out of his office, looking relieved, almost calm. It's handled, he said. Marcia's voice shook. Where were they? Darren blinked, as if surprised by the question. They left. They left. Marcia repeated. Yeah, Darren said smoothly. They didn't want to hang around. I gave them what they needed. I stepped forward. Darren, there was no one in the parking lot. For the first time in months, Darren's mask slipped. Just a fraction. His eyes hardened like stones. Then he smiled, slow and sad. Paul, he said gently, I think you're imagining things. You're stressed. You're looking for problems. The enemy is twisting your mind. Marcia made a small sound, like a sob caught in her throat. I felt heat rise up my neck, not from embarrassment, but from anger, so controlled it felt cold. I want the 300 back, I said. Darren's smile vanished. Excuse me. The emergency funds, I said, voice steady. I want them back. Now. Darren's nostrils flared. You don't get to talk to me like that, he said, voice low and dangerous. Marcia whispered, Darren, please. Darren looked at her and softened, switching tones instantly. Marcia, you know me. You know my heart. Don't let Paul's paranoia poison you. Then he turned back to me. This is what I meant. You're attacking the work. I'm protecting it, I said. Darren stepped closer. You're making yourself an enemy of the community. The word enemy hung there, heavy. I didn't back up. I said, then we need a meeting. With the board. With the group. Everyone who donates and serves. We need transparency. Darren's eyes narrowed. You do that? You'd bring this into the open? You'd scandalize the church over $300. Over 300, I thought. Like it was only 300. I'd do it over any amount, I said. Because it's not about the amount. It's about truth. Darren stared at me, and then he laughed, a short, humorless sound. Fine, he said. Call your meeting. He turned and walked back into his office, closing the door hard. Marcia sank onto a folding chair, trembling. I sat beside her, my own hands shaking now that I was alone with the reality. Marcia whispered, "What do we do?" I said, "We tell the truth." And in my head, I heard my friend's voice, prepare for backlash. The meeting was set for the following Sunday afternoon. Darren didn't try to stop it. Instead, he prepared. He preached that morning on unity. He preached about the danger of division. He preached about Satan working through suspicion. He never said my name, but everyone knew. When he said, sometimes the greatest threat to ministry comes from inside, people looked at me. I kept my face neutral, my hands folded, my heart beating loud. After service, people gathered in the fellowship hall, folding chairs in rows. Coffee, murmurs. I had printed reports, bank statements, a ledger of discrepancies, dates, amounts, patterns. I didn't bring speculation. I didn't bring insults. I brought math. Marcia sat near the front, eyes red, clutching a tissue. Darren stood beside the podium, calm, hands open, the picture of wounded leadership. The church board members sat up front too, looking uncomfortable. They wanted this to go away. You could see it on their faces. I took a deep breath and stepped forward when it was my turn. My voice was steady, even though my stomach churned. I'm Paul. I began, and it felt strange that something so simple could matter so much. I handle the finances for the bridge, and I need to share some information with you about our funds. The room quieted. Darren's eyes were on me like a spotlight. I started with the basics. How much we'd raised this year. How many people we'd helped. What our mission was. Then I moved into the discrepancies. I showed the first gaps, small, explained away. I showed how they grew. I showed how cash withdrawals increased. I showed how documentation was absent. I showed the chili cook-off discrepancy. Murmurs began. Someone whispered, "That can't be right." I kept going. I explained that we'd tried to implement safeguards. I explained the emergency fund. I explained what Marcia and I witnessed that night. Marcia made a small sound, confirming without words. I held up the bank alert printout. There was a 500 cash withdrawal on this date. There is no documentation for it. There is no corresponding assistance recorded. Darren's face looked pained, like he was being attacked. I kept my tone calm. I'm not here to accuse for the sake of accusation. I am here because donor money is sacred trust. We owe transparency. Then I said the part that made my throat tighten. I believe funds have been misused. The room erupted in murmurs. Darren stepped forward immediately, voice trembling with emotion. "Paul, this is what I feared." He turned to the room, eyes wet. "Do you hear this? He's accusing me. In my own church. After everything we've done." People started talking at once. Someone shouted, "How dare you?" Another voice, "This is an attack on faith." A woman stood up, eyes blazing. "You're tearing apart the community." My heart hammered, but I didn't move. Darren raised a hand like a pastor calming a storm. Please, let's be gentle." He looked at me, voice soft. "Paul, I know you're struggling. I know anxiety can make you see patterns where there aren't any. But to do this, to bring this into the open," he let his voice break, perfectly timed. "I've spent nights with people who wanted to die," Darren continued. "I've held crying mothers. I've prayed with addicts. And now I'm being treated like a criminal because I didn't fill out a form." He turned to the board. "Is this who we are now? A church that audits compassion?" People nodded, murmuring agreement. I felt the blowback hit full force. It was exactly what my friend had warned me about. They weren't hearing the numbers. They were hearing the threat to their hero. Someone pointed at me and said, "You're bitter." Another voice, "You always were controlling." I swallowed hard. Then Tim, Quiet Tim, who always stayed late, stood up. His face was tense. Paul doesn't do this for fun, he said. He's not a drama guy. If he's saying it, it's serious. A few people looked uncertain. Darren's eyes flickered toward Tim, annoyance flashing for a split second, then gone. Marcia stood up too, trembling. I was there, she said softly. There was no one in the parking lot. Darren took the money. Gasps. Darren's face tightened. Marcia, are you really going to do this? After all these years? Marcia's voice shook harder. I'm sorry. I can't lie. The room was split now, half outraged at me, half shocked, half confused. It felt like the air itself was tearing. I stepped forward again, raising my voice just enough to be heard. I'm not attacking faith, I said. I'm protecting it. Faith without integrity is just performance. Darren's eyes went cold. A board member stood up, sweating. Okay. We need to handle this calmly. We'll form a committee. We'll review the records. Darren will step back temporarily while we investigate. The word investigate made people flinch like it was obscene. Darren put a hand over his heart. So I'm guilty until proven innocent. The board member stammered. No, just... Darren turned to the room, voice rising with controlled heartbreak. I have given everything to this, and now I'm being humiliated because one man decided to weaponize paperwork. And there it was, the framing. I was the weapon, not the missing money. Someone yelled, "Shame on you, Paul." My cheeks burned, but I looked at the faces, people I'd known for years, and I realized something painful. They weren't protecting Darren. They were protecting themselves. Because if Darren was a thief, what did that say about their judgment? Their trust? Their faith in their own ability to see goodness? It was easier to believe I was a villain. The meeting ended in chaos, even though no one shouted like in movies. It was church chaos, whispered intensity, people leaving in tight clusters, some avoiding eye contact, some patting Darren's back like he'd been wounded by a sniper. Darren didn't speak to me afterward. He walked out surrounded by supporters, head bowed like a martyr. Marcia squeezed my hand and whispered, "You did the right thing." But my stomach still felt like a stone, because doing the right thing doesn't always feel righteous. Sometimes it feels like standing alone in a hallway with fluorescent lights buzzing, wondering how you became the enemy in the story. Over the next few weeks, the investigation happened, quietly behind closed doors. The board requested full bank records. They requested receipts. They requested explanations. Darren provided stories, not documents. He cried in meetings. He prayed out loud. He talked about persecution. But the bank records didn't care about persecution. The records were blunt. Cash withdrawals, transfers, checks, patterns. Eventually, the board had no choice but to face it. They confronted Darren with the numbers. And then Darren did what charismatic leaders do when the net closes. He disappeared, not literally vanished, but he resigned abruptly, citing spiritual attack and unfair treatment. He sent a long email to the congregation about stepping away for healing. He never admitted wrongdoing. He never returned the money. He framed his departure as a sacrifice, a noble retreat from a toxic environment. Some people believed him. Some people didn't. The bridge froze its operations for a while. Donors stopped giving. The community suffered, not because we told the truth, but because the truth revealed how fragile trust really was. I lost friends. People who used to hug me after service walked past me like I was invisible. A woman I'd helped move furniture years ago unfriended me online. Someone left an anonymous note in my car. Judas. I sat in my driveway one night, staring at that note, my hands shaking, and I felt something hollow in me. Not regret exactly. Grief. Because I realized you can do the right thing and still be punished for it, not by God, but by people who confuse comfort with holiness. Marcia stayed close. Tim stayed close. A few others too. Quiet people. People who looked at numbers and didn't need a hero. We rebuilt slowly. We created a new structure. 3 signers, no cash withdrawals, strict documentation, outside review quarterly. We trained volunteers. We told donors openly what happened without dragging Darren's name through mud. Just facts. Funds misused, safeguards implemented, commitment to integrity. Some donors came back. Not all, but the ones that did came back stronger because they respected transparency more than image. Still, late at night, I'd replay the meeting in my head. The accusations, the looks, the way Darren had turned the room against me with a trembling voice and a wounded expression. And I'd ask myself the question that haunted me. Am I the asshole? Because I knew what people were saying. They said I should have handled it quietly, privately, without involving the congregation, without making a scene, without attacking the church. They said I should have trusted Darren. They said I ruined something beautiful. But then I'd open my spreadsheet, look at the totals, the missing amounts, the pattern of withdrawals. And I'd remember the empty parking lot. I'd remember the way Darren's face changed for that split second. I'd remember Marcia trembling, whispering, "There's no one out there." And I know the answer. If protecting a community from financial abuse makes me the villain, then maybe the community needed a villain. Or maybe it needed someone willing to be hated for the sake of truth. So here I am, typing this out because I can't shake it. I can't stop hearing Darren's voice asking, "Do you trust me?" and my own voice answering, "Of course," like a reflex. Maybe I should have said no earlier. Maybe I should have forced accountability sooner. Maybe I should have gone straight to the board instead of building traps. But I did what I did when the evidence became undeniable. I brought it into the light, and the light burned. AITA for presenting the findings to the group and effectively blowing up our community's trust in the process, even if it meant exposing someone everyone loved. If you've read this far, please hit like and subscribe. Your support helps me keep sharing stories like this, and it means more than you know. I didn't realize how much I'd been holding my breath until Darren resigned. It happened on a Thursday morning, an email sent at 6:12 a.m., time for maximum impact. Early enough to catch the prayer warriors with their coffee, early enough to set the tone before anyone had spoken to anyone else, early enough that by the time the rest of us woke up, the narrative would already be moving like water downhill. Subject: a season of stepping back. He wrote in that familiar Darren style, soft, spiritual, drenched in humility while somehow still defending himself. He didn't name me, but he didn't need to. He spoke about false accusations, division, a spirit of suspicion, and the pain of serving faithfully only to be questioned by those who once stood beside me. He said he was stepping back for the health of my family. He said he needed to listen for God's voice away from the noise. He said he forgave those who have hurt me and asked the church to pray for unity. He didn't say the words missing money. He didn't say the words cash withdrawal. He didn't say embezzlement. He said season, as if it were weather, as if this was happening to him, not because of him. By 7:15 a.m., my phone started buzzing. Not calls, texts, short ones. Why would you do this? I hope you're happy. Darren didn't deserve this. You really went too far. I sat at my kitchen table in my work clothes, coffee untouched, reading the screen like it was a language I'd suddenly forgotten how to understand. It wasn't that I expected applause. I didn't, but a part of me, an embarrassingly hopeful part, thought that once Darren stepped down, the room would exhale. People would connect the dots. They'd realize I wasn't making this up. Instead, Darren's resignation didn't feel like confirmation to them. It felt like martyrdom. He wasn't stepping down because the numbers caught him. He was stepping down because I heard him. That's what they believed. Or that's what they wanted to believe. Because the alternative meant looking at their own hands. Hands that had clapped for Darren. Hands that had dropped envelopes into offering baskets. Hands that had patted him on the back and called him a gift. If Darren was a thief, then the church had been fooled. And people hate being fooled. It's easier to hate the person who pulled back the curtain. That afternoon, the board called an emergency meeting. Not the full congregation this time. Just board members, finance team, and key volunteers, which apparently meant anyone who had a role that made this not completely ignorable. I went because I had to. I went because if I didn't show, Darren's narrative would fill the space I left behind. Marcia came too, shoulders hunched like she expected stones. Tim sat beside her, jaw clenched. We gathered in the smaller conference room near the pastor's office, a room that smelled like old books and lemon cleaner, with framed mission statements on the walls that suddenly felt like jokes. The pastor, Pastor Glenn, stood at the head of the table, hands folded. He looked exhausted. He cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming. I know emotions are high. That was an understatement. One board member, a man named Ron who always wore polos tucked too tight, leaned forward and said, "Before we get into anything else, we need to address the damage this has done." I blinked. The damage? Ron's eyes narrowed. Yes, people are upset. Attendance is down already. Donations are going to drop. Families are talking about leaving. I felt heat bloom in my chest. Ron, the money. Paul, he cut in, holding up a hand like I was a child interrupting. We all agree there were irregularities. Irregularities. Like we were talking about wrinkles in carpet, not missing thousands. Pastor Glenn spoke again. We have to be careful with language until we have final conclusions. Marcia's voice cracked. We saw him take the emergency cash. Ron turned to her with a tight smile. Marcia, honey, we're not calling anyone a liar. But people can misunderstand situations. Tim's chair scraped back slightly. Misunderstand an empty parking lot. The room went quiet for a second. Then another board member, Linda, who always organized the Christmas pageant, said, Darren did a lot of good. We can't let this erase that. My hands curled under the table. No one is erasing the good, I said carefully. But good doesn't cancel fraud. Pastor Glenn's eyebrows lifted at the word. Ron exhaled like I'd said swear. See? This is the issue. The tone. The accusations. I stared at him. You want tone? Fine. Let's use numbers. I have bank statements. I have reconciliation reports. I have documented discrepancies going back months. This isn't a tone problem. This is a math problem. I slid my binder onto the table, open to the summary. I'd printed dates, amounts, categories, missing documentation, the total shortfall estimate. Pastor Glenn leaned down to read. His face drained slightly of color as his eyes moved down the page. Ron glanced at it and scoffed. These are assumptions. You're assuming money is missing. I pointed to the line item. This is a cash withdrawal. 500. No record of assistance. No receipt. Linda frowned. But Darren said, that's the point. I snapped, then immediately softened because snapping was oxygen for their narrative. Darren said a lot of things. I'm not saying he didn't help people. I'm saying the records don't support the withdrawals. Pastor Glenn rubbed his forehead. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We will formally freeze the bridge account. We'll require board approval for any spending. And we will commission an outside review. Ron bristled. Outside review costs money. Tim said flatly, so does losing it. Pastor Glenn continued, and we will ask Darren to meet with the board to clarify. Marcia shook her head. He won't. Pastor Glenn's lips tightened. We still have to ask. I sat back, my heart hammering, because this was the first time I heard the pastor sound not uncertain. He sounded scared. Not scared of Darren. Scared of what this meant for the church's image. The meeting ended with polite prayers and tense silence. As we stood to leave, Ron caught my arm lightly. Paul, he said, voice low, I know you think you're doing the right thing, but you have to understand there's a way to do things without tearing people apart. My arm felt cold where he touched me. I said, tell that to Darren. Ron's expression hardened. Don't be bitter. I pulled my arm away and walked out. In the hallway, Marcia leaned against the wall and started crying. Not sobbing, not loud, just quiet tears, the kind that look like they're coming from a place too deep for sound. I didn't want this, she whispered. I know, I said, my throat tightened. Neither did I. Tim stared down the hall, where Darren's office door sat closed, as if he expected it to open and Darren to step out with that calm smile and make it all disappear. Tim said, you know what's sick? He's still out there somewhere telling people he left because he was persecuted. I swallowed. Yeah. Tim's voice dropped. And people will believe him. I didn't answer because I didn't know how to fix that. You can't audit charisma. The weeks that followed felt like living inside a rumor. In church, there were new seating patterns, clusters of Darren loyalists on one side, people who didn't know what to think in the middle, and the quiet few who believed the numbers scattered like they didn't want to be seen together. I could feel eyes on me during worship. Sometimes pity, sometimes anger, sometimes something that looked like suspicion, like maybe they believed Darren's line about me struggling. I started arriving late and leaving early, which only made people say, see, he's ashamed. You can't win when people have already chosen your role. The outside review finally happened. A local CPA from another church in the area volunteered, someone with professional credentials and no emotional attachment to Darren. She came in with a calm face and a laptop and asked for records. Darren's records were thin. My records were thick. That was the thing about being methodical. When you're right, your proof is boring. It's not a dramatic confrontation. It's a stack of paper that says this happened. The CPA compared bank statements to documented assistance. She requested copies of checks. She looked at cash withdrawals. She asked Darren for supporting information. Darren didn't respond. Not at first. Then, 2 weeks into the review, he finally emailed Pastor Glenn. Just one email. In it, Darren said he was heartbroken by what was happening, that he felt betrayed, and that he was not obligated to provide confidential information about vulnerable families to satisfy a spirit of accusation. He closed with, "I forgive you all. I pray you find peace." He still didn't attach receipts. The CPA concluded what anyone with eyes could conclude. There was mismanagement of funds at minimum. There were withdrawals with no documentation. There were patterns consistent with misuse. She couldn't prove where the money went without Darren cooperating, but she could prove the trail ended in darkness. When the board received her report, they didn't immediately tell the congregation. They held it. For wisdom, they said. For timing. For prayer. I found out because Tim forwarded me a screenshot of an email he got from someone on the finance team. They're trying to bury it. That sentence punched me right in the chest. I drove to the church that night, parked in the same lot where this stranded family supposedly waited, and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the building. It looked peaceful, glowing softly from the streetlights. It looked like innocence. It wasn't. I walked inside. Pastor Glenn was in his office, the light on, shoulders slumped behind his desk. He looked up when I entered, surprised but not angry. More like he'd been expecting this and dreaded it. "Paul," he said quietly. "Seat." "I did," I said. "I heard the report is done." His jaw tightened. "Yes, and you're not sharing it," I said. He exhaled. "We need to be careful. People are hurting. This could split the church." I leaned forward. "Pastor, it already split. The only question is whether we heal with truth or rot with secrecy." He rubbed his eyes. "You don't understand," he said softly. "There are families who will leave. There are donors who will stop giving. The community will suffer." I stared at him. The community already suffered. Money meant for help is gone. He flinched. I continued, voice steady. "If we hide this, we tell the congregation that image matters more than integrity. That's not a church. That's a stage." His eyes looked wet. "I just want to protect people," he whispered. "So do I said. "That's why I'm here." There was a long silence. Pastor Glenn said, "What do you want?" I didn't hesitate. "I want the report shared. I want donors informed. I want a police report filed." Pastor Glenn's face tightened at the last part. "That's extreme," he said. I felt something cold settle in me. "It's not extreme. It's appropriate." He shook his head. "Darren did good. He helped people. He stole," I said, and my voice didn't shake this time. Pastor Glenn looked away, like the word hurt. I said, "If you don't file, you're telling every future Darren that the church is a safe place to steal, because we won't hold them accountable." He whispered, "What about forgiveness?" I swallowed hard. Forgiveness isn't the same as removing consequences. Forgiveness doesn't rewrite bank statements. Pastor Glenn stared at his desk for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, "If we file a report, it becomes public." "Yes," I said, "and it will hurt." "Yes," I said again. He looked up at me, eyes searching. "Are you prepared to be hated for this?" I thought of no in my car. I thought of the whispers. I thought of the way people had looked at me like I'd kicked their dog. And I heard myself say, "I already am." Pastor Glenn nodded slowly, like something in him gave way. "Okay," he whispered. "We'll do it." The police report was filed the following week. No dramatics, no handcuffs in the sanctuary, just paperwork and an officer who listened politely and took notes and asked for documentation. I provided everything. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. The congregation found out because rumors move faster than official announcements. And when Pastor Glenn finally addressed it, On a Sunday morning with trembling hands and a prepared statement, the room felt like it had no air. He didn't name Darren at first. He spoke in generalities. Then someone stood up and demanded names. A woman shouted, "Are you saying Darren stole from us?" Pastor Glenn's face crumpled. He said, softly, "The review found misuse of funds." And that was enough. People cried. People shouted. People stormed out. Some people turned on Darren. Some turned on me. Some turned on the board for letting this happen. And the saddest group of all, the ones who just sat there, staring blankly, looked like their faith had been punched in the throat. After service, I stood outside in the cold air, watching people leave in clusters. A man I'd known for years, Jerry, who used to talk to me about football, walked up to me. His face was red with anger. He jabbed a finger toward my chest. "You destroyed this church." I swallowed. "Jerry." "No," he snapped. "You could have handled it quietly. You wanted to be a hero." The irony almost made me laugh, but it wasn't funny. I said, "I didn't want to be anything. I wanted the money to go where it was supposed to." Jerry sneered. "Darren helped people. You don't know what he carried." I felt my voice rise a notch. Then why couldn't he show receipts? Why couldn't he follow process? Why couldn't he answer basic questions? Jerry's eyes flashed. "Because he wasn't doing it for you. He was doing it for God." I stared at him. Then I said, quietly, "If God needs stolen money, we've got bigger problems." Jerry's face twisted like I'd slapped him. He walked away. Marcia came out, pulling her coat tighter. Tim followed. Marcia whispered, "They're going to blame you for years." Tim said, "Let them. At least the truth is out." I looked at the church building, its brick walls steady, its cross silhouetted against a gray sky. And I realized that Darren's real theft wasn't just money. It was trust. It was the community's ability to believe in itself. And the hardest part was that I couldn't get that back for them, no matter how many binders of proof I had. A month later, the detective called me. He said they'd contacted Darren. Darren had lawyered up immediately. He claimed everything was ministry discretion. He claimed donors understood funds were used as needed. He claimed I was biased and had personal issues. The detective said, carefully, without direct proof of personal enrichment, it's complicated. I felt my throat tighten. So he gets away with it? The detective paused. Not necessarily. But churches often don't have the same controls as businesses. It creates gray areas. Gray. Darren lived in gray. He had weaponized gray. After the call, I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, hands shaking on the steering wheel. I thought about all the nights I'd spent building safeguards, all the hours of documentation, all the friendships lost. And still, Darren might walk away. Not because he was innocent, but because the system was too polite to call him what he was. That's when the quiet revenge part happened. Not the dramatic kind people fantasize about. Not slashing tires or public humiliation. My revenge was boring. My revenge was structural. I decided Darren would never have that kind of access again. Anywhere. I reached out to other community groups quietly. Nonprofits. Church committees. The local food pantry board. I didn't gossip. I didn't rant. I shared one thing, policy. I offered to help them set up safeguards. Dual signatures. No cash withdrawals. Documentation templates. Basic internal controls. I framed it as lessons learned and best practices. And because I wasn't emotional, because I wasn't dramatic, people listened. They didn't ask for Darren's name. They didn't need to. The point wasn't Darren. The point was the hole he'd used. And I started closing holes. Over the next year, 3 different groups implemented controls. One treasurer told me, "We didn't realize how easy it would be for someone to take money." I nodded. Neither did we. That was my revenge, making the world harder for the next Darren. Because even if the law couldn't pin him, I could at least make sure fewer people had to learn this the way we did. Here's where I'm stuck and why I'm posting. Because Darren still has supporters. He still shows up in town sometimes, smiling, greeting people like nothing happened. He's joined another church an hour away, from what I hear. And whenever someone from my old congregation sees me, there's this awkward pause, like they're remembering the day they decided I was either a protector or a traitor. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I wonder if I should have just quit quietly. If I should have handed the binder to the board and walked away. If I should have let Darren's story keep flowing. because the community was happier in it. But then I think of the people who needed that money. The ones who didn't get help because it vanished into Darren's pocket or into whatever gray space he claimed was ministry. And I can't regret what I did. I can only grieve what it cost. So, AITA for pushing this all the way to a public report and police involvement, knowing it would blow up friendships, damage the church, and possibly still not punish Darren the way people think he deserves. If you want more stories like this, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Would you have stayed quiet, or would you have done what I did?